Hey everyone, and welcome to the podcast Work to Earn. Here we talk with people from Web3 world about their career paths. This podcast is our way to dive into Web3, so we're building humans. It's a platform where seasoned experts share their experience with the Web3 builders during one-on-one advice sessions. My name is Fedor and I am CMO at Humans, and today's episode we record with Tatyana Mamut.
Hi, my name is Alina. I'm 12 and I live in San Francisco.
Hi, my name is Mira. I'm 8 and I live in San Francisco.
My mom is Tatyana Mamut, who is a board member, product leader, and advisor for many tech companies.
She speaks on topics like how to build products people love and how to build amazing culture.
Also, she is an advisor and investor in lots of startups. Some of them are Web3 startups. As our team core focus belongs to HR tech and ed tech products, we are especially interested in discussion the product brain trust. In HR tech startup, the user-owned talent network. So let's dive into the conversation.
Enjoy the podcast.
Hi, Tatyana. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Fedor.
How was your morning start today?
Good. Just have my coffee. It's early in the morning in San Francisco, a little foggy this morning.
Amazing. And how do you usually design your day, which it consists of?
Oh, gosh. So it consists of getting my kids out of bed, making them breakfast, seeing if I have to make them lunch. There's I have 2 girls, so all kinds of hair shenanigans and issues usually ensue because they don't want to have short hair. And so lots of hairstyling conversations. And then, it depends. My days are very variable. Some days I have, meetings starting very early, sometimes a little bit later. But usually I try to have all of my meetings and conversations early in the day because I think best at night. I am definitely not a morning person. My brain does not function in the morning. I can barely deal with hair issues for my daughters in the morning. And so what I really like to do is save my energy up for my late nights so that I can write in the evening. So kind of working through the morning, picking my girls up from school around 3:00, from 3 to about 7. There's a lot of like family things like taking them to volleyball and they both really like chess, which makes me very, very proud as a, Ukrainian mom. But I never played chess. So they like piano and chess, 2 things I did not do. So that makes me very happy. And then around kind of 8 or 9 p.m. is when I start really thinking and writing. My brain really turns on late at night. And I start getting lots of ideas and lots of thoughts. And even when I was in graduate school writing my dissertation, I don't know if you can see my dissertation right now. I don't think you can. Back here. Oh, it's up higher here. There it is. Persons in transition. Okay. So even when I was writing my dissertation, I couldn't write until late at night. I often spent a lot of all-nighters just writing because that's when my brain works the best.
You're an advisor at many projects, at many startups. What does it exactly mean to be an advisor?
Yeah, an advisor ranges for a few different things. So, oftentimes, I do early stage startup advising. I do late stage startup advising or later stage startup advising. And then I also advise sometimes chief product officers or CEOs that are at scaled companies that are trying to do something, to drive innovation. So either they've just gone through a lot of M&A and they're trying to figure out how to really transform their product culture and their product strategy to bring these acquired businesses into their portfolio in an effective way, or they're trying to build something new inside their company. So let me talk about all 3 of those stages. So with early, usually founders, I'm working with the founding team, talking to them about, they all have a product idea, right? And their product idea is, usually pretty awesome, right? Mm-hmm. And I help them just craft how to tell the story, how to understand the market, and then how to build the first MVP. So one of the things that I really think has done a disservice to a lot of startups is this lean startup sort of ideology, right? And lean startup ideology is build something, then learn, then iterate. Well, the problem is with that is that it doesn't really have anything before building the first thing. You don't know if, so you basically don't know if what you're building is completely off target or not, right? Because when you haven't built any, because here's the reality. Before you start building, you have 360 degrees of freedom. You can do anything. But once the very first MVP is built, you have narrowed your degrees of freedom down to a very, very narrow set of choices. And so the most important decision that a founder will make is who is the customer, which is the first decision. Who is the customer I'm going to build my MVP for? And then what are the parameters, right? What is the experience that that first MVP is going to deliver? Because once you decide those things, it is very, very, very hard to backtrack away from those. So it's very useful for founders to have, an advisor, and that's why they often look to me to just sort of make sure that they're thinking about that first MVP in the right way. So I review UX designs, I give them feedback on the experience. I review kind of their product strategy, right? Who is the customer that they're targeting, right? What are the decisions that they're making in building that first MVP? Because remember, it's build, learn, iterate. It's not build, learn, redesign, right? Because because you can only iteration, which is true, right? The lean startup methodology really, it admits, right, that the only thing you can do once you build something is iterate it. You can't completely rethink it. You can't completely redesign it because a lot of those foundational decisions have already been made. So what I help founders do is to get away from that, just build, no matter what it is, mentality, to be a little bit more thoughtful and therefore increase their probability of success, so that they don't flame out very early on and don't have major problems because they realize that, the first thing we built, maybe the foundation that we built isn't even the right foundation that we need to meet the market. So that's what I do with early stage founders. With scaling founders, and CEOs, there's a lot around culture or rebuilding culture, because what happens if you're successful, which, fortunately a lot of the folks that I've worked with, have been very successful. At some point, you need to really think about redesigning, right, how your organization works. So, after your Series A, and especially after usually your Series B or C, you've kind of hit an inflection point where you really need to reorg, and sort of modernize your organization. You need to put in roles and functions, and you had to think about how product and engineering really works together and how the systems operate, right? Because you can't really manage your company just through, personal relationships anymore, which is how most startups start, right? It's just like a bunch of friends in a room. They're all like talking to each other. They're all kind of working together. It's very fluid, right? But once you start scaling, once you get over 150 people, usually, right? Dunbar's number, sociology has that number. It's a very famous number, right? Because human organizations can't scale beyond that point based on relationships. Now you need hierarchies and you need structures and you need systems and all those kinds of things. So really helping them understand how to recraft their organization, bring in, product processes, build a product culture, really understand whether they want to continue to be functionally organized, which is where most startups start, or whether they want to, if they have multiple products with multiple markets, when do they start thinking about a business unit structure? So, kind of working with the executive team through that. And then, with very late stage, or even, public companies, working with usually a CPO, and sometimes also with the CEO, to really, understand how to drive innovation at scale. Because that's something that I've done in my career many times, is gone into big companies like Salesforce and Amazon and built something completely new. And that takes a particular mindset, a particular skill set, particular set of systems and processes. And it really takes for the CEO and the CPO to be supportive of that transformation, because that innovative business a lot of people talk about we're a startup within a big company, but what does it mean to actually do that, right? So I help the CPOs and the CEOs actually do that within their organizations.
Thank you for such a huge and deep answer. Let's dive deeper in the early stage startups. Maybe it's very close to our experience, our current experience. But for me, it's very interesting. What are the questions you ask founders to build a valuable MVP? So, what questions should they answer before making an MVP?
Well, the first and most important one is, who do you think is your first customer set? And why do you think you're going to build something that's going to be better than any other alternative that they have? And that alternative that they have could be doing things manually, right? Or it could be doing nothing at all, right? And so really understanding when you're a startup, right, you need to really offer something that is going to be so valuable, right, that it's going to be able to create a wedge, right, in the market. And, a lot of people talk about, product-led growth now. And I do have the early stage sort of founders thinking about what are the mechanisms by which your offer is going to be so great, your product is going to be so great that it will start to build on its own, and you're not going to have to spend, just crazy amounts of marketing dollars, right, to get it off the ground. Now, a VC might come in and want to give you crazy amounts of marketing dollars to get it off the ground and to scale it faster. But the product needs to be so good that customers, right, are doing a lot of the growth work themselves, right, by referring other people or, again, building in network effects into the product experience and those types of things. So really, who is your customer? And if they need, and they can't be everyone, or everyone in this market, or everyone in sales, or I really help them clarify that answer, because for a good startup. So the other thing is, good startups are often thinking about the end goal, right? Like startup CEOs, imagine the end goal. Everyone in sales is going to use this once we're really successful. Okay, yes, eventually, yes, everyone in sales is going to use this. But right now, everyone in sales is not going to use it. So who is the first customer, right? So the thing that I help them think about is getting from that end state and pulling back to the sequence of steps. So who's the first customer? And again, pulling that back to, okay, who's the first customer? Then how are you going to expand that out? And then, later on, we'll talk about how we're going to expand that out even further. And the second one is, what's the value? Again, what's the value that you're building today in the MVP? That's going to be so awesome that it's going to create a wedge right into this market. And again, this isn't about, I don't care what you imagine you're going to do 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I mean, I do care, but that's not the purpose of our conversation. The purpose of our conversation is, how are you going to take the first step? And helping, people who are building the product, and the CEO really understand what is the sequence, where should they focus first, right? If it's a B2B business, you usually have user experience and you have buyer experience, right? Or the demos and you have a small team. So you have to weigh, right? Where to balance, how to balance, right? Your engineering dollars and, the focus of your product and engineering team. And that's what I help them do. I help them figure out, within the constrained resources that they have, how do they make those first few steps so that they're more likely to start to get traction, and then they can start to do it all, right? Because pulling back that vision into concrete steps, especially concrete first step, and then the next 2 steps after it, is sometimes the hardest part. Mm-hmm. Does that resonate with your experience?
Yeah, definitely. It resonates with all our experience, and sometimes we completely non-valuable MVPs, and after it we had to redesign it from the zero stage, not iterate, but redesign. So yeah, it's completely true.
Sometimes, you have the luxury of doing that, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have the resources to do that. I've seen quite a few startups where they don't, right? They kind of have to double down on their original idea because maybe they did get one or two customers on their original idea. And so they have to also service those customers, but they know that it's not scaling, right? And they've realized that the market that they've chosen, this is why the who is the customer is the most important conversation to have. Because if you define the customer set inadvertently too narrowly, you might get, again, 2 or 3 customers on your initial product and they might love it, but then you don't scale.
The thing I want to ask you is to look through the angle of product origination in Web3. It seemed like in Web3 there is like lack of product management skills, because those skills you've mentioned to like ask questions before building, these are like product management skills and to find the answers of these questions, of course. So what I see from my perspective is like developers are making apps for other developers, not for users, not for current customers. Do you see the same thing in Web3, and how can we solve it?
So most of my advising today is with Web3 companies, more and more. And I do have some that are still in developer experiences, but I will say that more and more are coming to me with a question around how do we actually make this usable for, regular people, for either consumers or business users. And I do have to say, like, my experience with Brain Trust, hopefully all your listeners know Brain Trust. They're an amazing Web3 talent network. And I was one of the first investors and advisors for Brain Trust. And they had design at the center of their company and their product from the beginning, right? They really thought about what can we take from the best experiences in not just talent marketplaces, but all marketplaces, how all marketplaces work in the Web2 world, and really learn from that and take truly a design-driven and a product-driven approach to developing a Web3-based talent marketplace. And I think more and more early stage startups are doing this as well. There are several identity startups in the Web3 world, which I'm particularly excited about. This is an area that I've been very passionate about since 2017. Because I do think that an identity layer, a pseudonymous identity layer for Web3 applications will really kind of unlock a lot of things. But it has to be both secure, which is where you have a lot of very bad user experiences happen when you try to build insecurity into Web3. But it has to be secure, but also has to be highly usable by regular people, right? And so this is where a lot of these identity startups are really, they're either focused on sort of KYC for financial services, where they allow the front end, to be a little bit more abstracted, or for the ones that are going directly to consumers, they're really focusing on user experience. They're really focusing on what is the right product management skills. And they're hiring product managers and designers very, very early on. They're not just a group of, engineers working together, putting something together. And this is what Brain Trust did too. Brain Trust was founded by, not just, engineering folks, but also people who are very inclined with product management, people who had built marketplaces before, and they brought in amazing design talent from the beginning. So I am seeing a lot more of that. And this is what we need to have Web3 really start to take off, right? It needs to be usable. It needs to be a highly desirable experience, and it needs to be really inclusive of everyone. And everyone who doesn't code and can't remember, 18 random letters and numbers. So, those types of things are just not going to work.
We'll definitely dive into the conversation about Brain Trust, but now I want to ask you a little bit about your personal experience. As you've mentioned, you've entered the market from 2017. It seems like you're in Web3 from the very beginning, in crypto, in Web3, whatever we can name it. How have you entered the Web3?
So you're right. It was. I mean, Web3 was just coined very recently. So I actually started learning about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in 2010.
Wow.
And I was doing a project. I worked at IDEO, which is a global design firm, and one of my main clients was Visa, right? Visa, like the credit cards, right?
Yeah,
Visa
yeah.
network. And we were doing a project on global digital currency and the future of money globally, right? And I was, kind of looking at a lot of things. And my husband, who's, an engineer, he reads Slashdot a lot, read Slashdot a lot back in 2009, 2010. And he heard me again on the phone talking about global digital currency and the future of digital currency. And he was like, well, this is the future of digital currency. And he showed me the very first announcement on Slashdot for Bitcoin. So I was like super inspired. I took Bitcoin to Visa and I introduced them to it in 2010.
Wow.
2010, I started learning about Bitcoin, and they laughed me out of the room. They were like, this is ridiculous, right? It was all like drugs and t-shirts, right? And whatever was being done on Silk Road, right? That's what Bitcoin was about. That was like that was the use case, right? Those were the use cases for Bitcoin. So, they thought it was completely irrelevant. But of course, I actually, am from the Soviet Union. It was the Soviet Union back then. And I studied the Russian economic transition. And I actually, I don't know if you're too young, Fedor, but in 1998, I actually wrote a lot of research papers, right, on the collapse, right, of the Russian economy. And I really understood what hyperinflation does, right, to people and to countries. And I thought, well, Americans don't understand Bitcoin because they've never been through or they can't remember a period of hyperinflation and currency collapse. But guess what? I bet you everyone else around the world gets it because they do understand hyperinflation and currency collapse. And that's actually why I think, American VCs and bankers don't fully understand the value of cryptocurrencies, or they question it a lot more than people in other countries, because I think you have to have really understood that government fiat currencies aren't that stable and aren't that awesome,
Stable,
right?
yeah.
So that they're just as much fictions of the imagination as cryptocurrencies are, right? But because I'd had that experience, I started doing a lot of projects and a lot of, not a lot of projects, but a lot of provocations at IDEO around, what does, a blockchain-based, cryptocurrency, like what does that do, right? What is a currency or a token or a medium of exchange and a store of value that's built on a decentralized network, right? Where one actor doesn't control the transaction activity. What does that mean, right, for the future of, of money and exchange and all that kind of stuff? So, that was back in 2010, 2011. But again, nobody was thinking about it or talking about it or anything. So then, I went along and I did my, normal tech jobs. And then in 2017, right, the price of Bitcoin just 2014 was the first spike, then it was 2017. And now it wasn't just Bitcoin, right? It was actually a lot of startups that started being funded. At the time in 2017, it was a lot of, foreign investors that were, kind of jumping into blockchain businesses, blockchain companies. But there were some very interesting ones that were getting started. Wireline was one of them in early 2018. And I was asked to join the founding team. And at the time I was at AWS and I couldn't do any advising or consulting or side anything while I was at Amazon because the employment contract there. And so I had to leave AWS in order to pursue advising blockchain companies. So I didn't join Wireline full time. I was a very deep advisor for them. I was essentially for a while even a kind of an extension of their executive team and helped them sort of set up the idea and the business. And I learned a lot from that experience. So Wireline, the token went to zero because they structured the token incorrectly and got in trouble with the SEC. It's all on the internet. If anybody wants to Google it. But it was an amazing kind of experience to see, right? Like how regulations were changing, how you needed to make these decisions right early on in the blockchain world. And so that was really like my deep foray. At that time in 2018, I advised 3 blockchain startups, all of which no longer exist. But, it was very early days and very interesting to see. And then, when I met the founders of Brain Trust in, I think it was 2019, late 2019, right? I was like, wow, this is an amazing use case. And I can really see the value proposition of a talent network built on a blockchain and having the token actually rise in value based on the number of transactions in the system. So that, idea really made sense to me. It was super compelling. And so, I got back in to blockchain, Web3 at that point. Maybe it was Web3 at that point. I'm not sure. But, started advising again for Web3 companies in, after that first, wave in, 2018 and then late 2019, again, it started to rise. So I can talk a lot about the dynamics of how quickly things changed between 2018 and especially 2020, right? That the Web3 companies that we see in 2020 are much healthier and much more built on a much more stable foundation than the ones in 2017 and 2018, because the regulatory environment was so uncertain, right? In 2017 and 2018, everybody was trying to structure their token as a utility, but then they were airdropping their tokens, right? And ICOing tokens like all the time so that it acted like a security. I mean, there was just like all kinds of nonsense happening, right? In 2017 and 2018. A lot of that nonsense has like gone down. But then also I think governments have done a good job getting some of the really questionable investors. There's still, I'm sure, lots of questionable investors, but there were really a lot of very questionable investors and investment strategies happening in 2017 and 2018 that really drove some, very bad, product and business decisions. And so I do think that anybody who thinks that the Web3 startups today will follow the path of the ones that were started in 2017 and 2018, I can tell you, generally, that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people in a much better place now. The regulatory environment is so much better. The money coming in and the investors are so much better, have very different incentives. And I'm very, very excited to see what the next few years will portend for all these Web3 startups, because I think they're in a really good place.
Especially now it's like a builder's market, when anyone is trying to build something new. You've mentioned that now almost all of your startups you advise are Web3. So I want to ask you, why so? What is the differences for you as advisor between Web2 startups and Web3 startups?
So not all of them, but more and more. I would say probably 60% at this point are Web3. And I like things that can change the world. And I think that Web3 can change the world. I think that it's a fundamentally new paradigm for how people can transact. And it can actually build different types of incentives into products, different types of incentives and not just experiences, right? You can definitely build new experiences just like you could in Web2, right? But you can also build new incentives. And that combination is really exciting to me. So I am, an anthropologist and an economist. My first degree is in microeconomics. I studied a lot of game theory. Actually, I helped write a book on game theory. It's somewhere on my shelf here, a textbook, which had a chapter on game theory. And so I actually really think it's fascinating how human behavior will be shaped by the types of things that we can build into the contracts and the exchanges in Web3.
It's very interesting, and you've mentioned that you have macroeconomic degree. So it's on the one hand, and on the other hand, I know that you are interested in culture, in society. You even have a Ph.D. So how does it match with crypto?
Well, that's exactly what tech startups need to do fundamentally at our core. What you're doing as a startup is understanding a certain customer set better than anyone else so that you can build something for them that they will value more than they value the alternatives today, right? So you are trying to understand a group of human beings and what they need. That's culture, that's anthropology, right? And then you're trying to build something for them, which is technology, right, that they will value more than they value anything else. And that's the economic side. So really, right, what we see, all great products do this. It's, IDEO really coined this in the design thinking kind of language, which is all great products live at the intersection of three things, right? Human desirability, a deep understanding of human beings, right? That's the cultural anthropology, right? The ability to build it, the technology, what it takes technologically to build that thing, right? That's the engineering side.
Yep.
And then the third is the economic side, right? How do you get people to value it so much that they will pay for it to create a sustainable business, right? And so, I bring those other two lenses, right? And I partner with great engineers and technologists to fill in that, that other one, the engineering side. And I do think that founding teams should think about who is bringing the real human expertise onto their team, right? And the other thing I would say is, it is expertise. It's not just like it's not like there are frameworks and there are systems and there are experiences, right, that make people really great at understanding customers and really understanding the insights to build a great product and to create a great product experience based on those insights. Not everyone can do that. Just because I use, an iPhone every day doesn't mean that I can build a great iPhone app, right? Because I don't have the technical background to do it, right? It's the same thing. Just because you're a human being that uses lots of products doesn't mean that you understand, how to gather the insight from a human being in order to build another product. So make sure that on a founding team, there aren't just technologists. There are also folks with a social science background, right? Or people who have built great products before, because that's what you will really need to round out the technical team and make sure you're on the path to a great product experience.
So you just combine both this parts with your education.
Exactly. Yes. Well, not just my education, but then also,
with your experience.
Yeah, I've got, over 25 years of experience, right, doing, big product innovations and building brand new technology products all over the world, right? And that's that experience that, is really needed to increase the chances of success for a startup. I mean, most startups that are successful are actually founded by people who are older, who are very experienced in their careers, because they actually have seen it before, right? They've done it before, right? Mm-hmm. They're able to do the pattern matching, right? And so, I think it's great that there's, a lot of, people coming out of college, founding startups. At the same time, right, those folks can really increase their chances of success, right? They also bring on a co-founder who's more experienced, who's actually worked in a tech company, who kind of knows what's happening, who's actually done some innovation. Or if they can't do that, then a set of advisors who can help them with that.
Tatyana, the thing I want to ask you now, how do you educate yourself like right now? How do you educate yourself during the life?
I'm lucky enough to live in San Francisco. So there's a lot happening and there's a lot going on all the time. I mean, this is one of the huge advantages of living in San Francisco is, I mean, Dreamforce just happened here. So there were a lot of, meetups and a lot of parties and cocktail parties and things happening. There's, networks, lots of VCs. They have constantly like mixers and, talking to people. IDEO Ventures is here, and I do talks with them. They're having an event in a week, and that's focused on Web3 startups. Not exclusively, but a lot of Web3 folks will be there. So, I mean, I have to say, like, I do like that the world now is more distributed and that people can work from anywhere. At the same time, I have to say there's still no place like Silicon Valley and San Francisco, because I educate myself by meeting people and by talking to people who are doing amazing things in the world. None of these people are publishing, right, what they're doing, because a lot of them are still, in stealth mode, or they're just busy building, but they have amazing ideas, and being able to bump into them, at a party or at a get together and talk to them is priceless. And I personally am not going to move out of the Bay Area, no matter how good the taxes are in another place, because I just think like the value of being in a dense social network and serendipitously meeting people who are working on amazing things, that's the most important thing to me. So I really educate myself by meeting people and talking to people, and being in San Francisco is, again, priceless for doing that.
Next topic I want to touch with you, you've already mentioned it, is you're an advisor and brain trust. So it's a decentralized talent network. By the way, your token is listed on Binance. So yeah, it's a huge company. So the thing I want to ask you, what do you think? What is the future of work?
So in case your listeners aren't familiar with Brain Trust really takes a lot of the friction around freelance work out of the system, because the incredible idea in a lot of ways for Brain Trust it's facilitated by the token. The token is necessary to make this idea work, but the idea or the insight is a fundamental one, which is right now people need to choose. Highly talented people, like a highly talented engineer or highly talented designer, needs to choose. Do they want to have a freelance job, right, where they just get paid, a pretty high hourly fee, right? Or do they want to go in-house into a company and get a lower hourly salary, but get equity in their company, right? And that's fundamentally the economic trade-off that they need to make. And Brain Trust says, well, what if you could be a freelancer and still get paid as a freelancer and not have to deal with all of the company politics, but actually get equity in a high-growth Web3 startup like Brain Trust? Because we will give our freelance talent tokens, right? So they are fundamentally solving a fundamental, a critical issue in the current economic system, right? So the future of work is the resolution of the Marxist conundrum, the Marxist dilemma, which is that there's capital and there's labor, and the two are at odds with each other, right? The capital tries to extract as much value from labor as possible. So Brain Trust is actually breaking or resolving that dilemma by saying, no, we're actually going to allow labor to form its own network of capital and to be able to grow that capital in a way that benefits the workers, right? The freelancers that are doing the work. And to me, like, that is the thing that really inspired me to say, like, this is an amazing idea, because it's like, it's the fundamental issue in capitalism, right? And it's the fundamental reason why so many, tech employees are unhappy, because they don't want to deal with the company politics, right? They don't want to deal with a lot of the really, terrible systems, right? In a company that they need to be part of, right? They don't want to go through performance reviews and be told that there's something wrong with them and they need to fix themselves or whatever, right? They like the freedom of being freelancers. They like the freedom of having that type of work, of working for yourself and just, relying on your work product to speak for itself, right? And so, but they don't want to give up the, upside of having the equity in a company. And so having the brain trust token, as you said, listed on Binance, right? Highly valuable asset, allows freelancers to actually have both benefits.
This product is based on tokenomics, and it cannot be not based on tokenomics. So it's
Right.
originally launched only with tokens. It can't work without it.
Exactly. So that's the other thing. Like, sometimes I have founders come to me and, they'll have an idea for, I don't know, something, right? Like, and I'll ask them, like, why do you need a token for this? Like, what's the Web3 angle on this? And they're like, they don't really have a good answer, because they're like, well, eventually we'll build in some smart contracts and da-da. I'm like, well, why don't you, like, just figure out what your core idea is? Because your core idea doesn't require any token, doesn't require anything, based on Web3. Why don't you figure that out first, and then see if you actually need to bring in the Web3 component, right? So that is the other thing that I help founders with, is, like, sometimes they'll come in and they think they have a Web3 idea, but
But it's not
they don't,
actually
there's no
Web3.
reason.
Yeah.
Right. There's no reason for the token. They're actually not doing anything that's resolving a fundamental problem in the product, right? With Web3 technology or with a token, right? There's two actual components to it, right? The Web3 like the blockchain technology, and then the tokenization of exchanges and transactions. Those two are two different things. So ideally, you will have both, right, that are necessary. And I help sort of founders figure out, like, is it really necessary for their idea, right? Because sometimes you can also overcomplicate your idea, right, by bringing in the Web3 aspect into it, especially too early.
As you've mentioned, the Web3 aspect shouldn't be bring into the product too early. So maybe products might be, like, MVPs might be based on Web2 mechanics, and only then founders should implement the Web3 one.
That is possible if built correctly, right? In the initial idea, right? I do think that one of the key issues is it necessary for the initial MVP? And if not, how do you leave the door open in your initial MVP to extend it later, right? To a blockchain, but not try to overcomplicate, especially if you have very few engineering resources right now. How do you basically create the simplest framework for decision making as possible for your MVP?
It seems like in this model, startups have to have like a huge horizon of planning of the future like features in it. What do you think? What is the, like, average product map for the startup? How far do they need to plan it?
So my experience, and maybe this is just my experience and the people who come to me, I'm not sure. In my experience, the founders are always thinking, like, way too far out. And the problem is not getting them to imagine the amazing future and all the features that they will build. The work is actually getting them to figure out what is the small basket of features that they can build in a few months that they can actually ship to customers, right? Getting them. So like in my experience, founders who are starting a company, they have the big vision of the future and all the features they want to build in the future already in their head, right? I don't know. Does this resonate with you? Okay. So,
To tell the truth, no, because yeah,
no?
we have like very small sprints, and
Right.
we like for maybe 2-3 months what we are building, and then we construct the future for maybe, yeah, we have of course that for investors like 1 year planning, but we totally understand that it might be changed at any time.
Oh, that's absolutely true. So here's what I'm saying. Like startups need to take a very emergent based approach, right? You need to figure out, because here's the thing about emergence versus planning. I actually don't like the word planning for any product, especially not for startups, because you actually don't know, or strategy, right? Strategy and planning assume that the future is going to be what you think it is today, right? Because you have to keep certain variables constant in order to plan
Yeah,
what you're going
yeah,
to do, what your strategy is within a constant set of variables. No variables are constant, none, right? Like the price of capital, right?
yeah,
Obviously not constant, right? Your ability to fundraise, not constant. Your competitive set, not constant. How expensive your input costs are, right? Or, developers are, right? Not constant. None of these things are constant. So you have to go from a strategy and planning perspective to an emergence perspective. And I think we're saying the same thing, right? Is like you have like a vision of the future of where you think you want to go, right? And then you have these tiny little sprints of like, okay, what can we build in the next few days or few weeks, right? To ship to customers. And then there's all that space in between those two, right?
yeah,
And how do you shift to an emergent mindset? And how do you have an emergent process where you have to keep track of the things that are coming up and the ideas that are coming up, right? Because some of those ideas are going to be really important, but some of those ideas are not going to be important. You almost have to take like a scenario planning approach to like, where's the world going? And on this list of ideas, which ideas are bubbling to the top in importance and which ideas are very, very few are like totally unimportant, but like less important. But it's really like which ideas are the ones that are moving with the world and which ones are the ones that are part of the old world, because the world is
exactly,
moving
yeah,
and you
yeah,
want to you want to have a roadmap that's emergent, that is moving with the world and is leading the world by a few weeks or a few months. That's what you want, right? And
exactly.
that is like, right, that is what you really want to do. And that's kind of the mindset you do. I am a huge advocate of something like a Google Sheet where you have, the things you're working on, right? And when those things will probably ship. And then a whole be below that, really listing out all of the other ideas that are coming up, right? And having a doc linked from that Google Sheet to explain what is the idea, who's monitoring it, who's advocating for it, and like keep track, right? And then the product leader or the CEO who can actually go into that sheet and sort of look at when the world comes, like when the world starts to move in a particular direction, or when they see that their customers are saying something, they can go back into that Google Sheet and say, have we thought about this idea before? If so, where did we see it before? Or do I need to put this idea on the sheet so that the team knows that I'm thinking about it, right? Because one of the other things that I hear from startup teams is the founder or the CEO is constantly putting in new ideas and
Yeah,
making the team crazy. But they're doing that because they fundamentally do have this emergence mindset. They're just not systematizing it well so that people don't get distracted by it and understand. But the CEO has a place to put it. Like the CEO needs to have a place to put those ideas and make sure that the team hears those ideas. But the team needs to know, like, don't get distracted by this right now, right? And we will move it up into the sprint when it's time.
It seems like a very, very high level of uncertainty in the work in startups. So can you maybe share some life hacks how to motivate team in these circumstances? How to motivate team in this extremely huge level of uncertainty?
Well, the best way, I think, to motivate everyone and to stop arguments internally is to constantly tell customer stories. Just like start every meeting with a story about a real human who is remember defining your customer? Like, you have to define your customer. If you don't have a product yet, you tell the story of a set of customers or an actual human who has a need that you guys are building for, and motivate them to say, like, see, people really have this need. So let's keep moving. Let's keep going. We're going to wow Bob, right? Like, here's Bob. Like, here's a real story. This is what he needs. We're building exactly what he needs. Come on, team, let's go, because there are, millions of other Bobs out there, and they're going to be so happy, right? If you don't have a product yet. If you do have a product already, again, bring the stories, like bring the actual quotes of customers, bring, the session replay, right, of what customers are doing that they haven't been able to do before, right? Bring those customer stories to your team, because those are the things that actually, people are motivated by hearing the story of a person that they've influenced. Right?
Mm-hmm.
People are really motivated to see that, oh my gosh, the thing that I have built, somebody's actually using. That's highly motivating.
Thanks for this insight. And what I want to ask you: are there any differences between motivation people in Web2 startups and in Web3 startups, or it's the same?
I mean, fundamentally, I think it's the same. People want to, great people want to build things for other people that they will use. Right. So, like, just bring the customer stories, no matter what kind of startup you're in, even if you're in a big company, small company, any company, just bring the stories of customers and real people, right, that you're building for. That's the most motivating thing. The motivation, I do think this is changing a little bit now that Web3 is going more mainstream, but it used to be a lot of very utopian sort of anarchists in the blockchain world. Like, again, back in 2017, 2018, there were a lot of anarchists who hated the government and wanted to end all government regulation and wanted everything to be anonymous. And I do think that's changing. So I think again, this is how the world is shifting, right? The Web3 world used to be part of a lot of very utopian visions about everybody's going to vote on what the company's going to do, and everybody's going to have this democratic process on what the next features should be. That didn't really happen. And I think that as Web3 becomes hopefully the mainstream, right, and the predominant, right, paradigm for building, other people will, get incorporated into these applications, and it'll be a little less utopian visions driving the product strategy. I do think much better things will happen in the world, but not based on an assumption that human nature is going to change, because I don't think human nature is going to change anytime soon. So
maybe one of the last questions I want to ask you: what are the differences between people culture in Web3 startups and in Web2 startups? Maybe you've just a little bit answered it, but let's try to dive deeper. Maybe let's focus on the leadership in Web2 and in Web3.
I mean, fundamentally, I don't think that there's that much difference for the. I think that the companies that will be successful in Web3 have leaders who could be successful probably in Web2.
Yeah.
I think that all leaders need to pay very close attention to culture, to motivation, to this concept of emergence, and to really helping their team have the permission to argue with them, right? And have a really healthy debate culture and be able to, really have a company that is open, flexible. I mean, the one thing that is true, the Web3 world is changing much faster, right? Because it's new, right? It feels like, to me, Web3 feels like the internet back in 1999 or 1998, right? When everybody first was moving to San Francisco. I mean, I'm old enough to have lived through that. And so it feels very similar. And there's going to be there's just a lot of change and a lot of fluidity. And there's going to be, booms and busts a couple of times, right? Before, the Amazons and the Salesforces and the, Netflixes emerge, right? But they will emerge, right? It's just that right now, there's just so much change just because the market is nascent, right? And the Web3 world is really nascent.
Tatyana, thank you so much for having time for this conversation. I think it will be extremely useful for our listeners, and also it was extremely useful for me to tell the truth. So thanks so much for finding time.
Thank you. And again, I'm on LinkedIn, so if anybody wants to follow me on LinkedIn, I post quite a bit, and I'll be posting more. I do talks, more talks and things like that. So that's the best way to find me if anybody wants to follow up.
Amazing. I'll put the link in the description of this podcast. Thanks so much. Thank you guys for listening to this podcast. We really need your feedback on this episode. So please rate us in the Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks for listening to this episode, and bye.